December 28, 1920, Milan, Italy. On a cold winter morning in one of Europe's most elegant cities, a girl named Igea Lissoni was born into a respectable middle-class family. Milan was a city of fashion, discipline, and tradition. Her parents believed in good manners, education, and social reputation. They raised their daughter to be graceful, proper, and careful about how she presented herself to the world. From a young age, Igea was different. She loved beauty, movement, and attention. While other children played quietly, she dreamed of stages and lights. Her parents noticed her passion and enrolled her in ballet training. Eventually, she earned a place at La Scala, one of the most famous ballet schools in the world. It was a proud moment for the Lissoni family. But ballet was cruel. Talent alone was not enough. Competition was fierce, and only a few dancers ever became stars. Igea trained hard, but she was honest with herself. Years later, she would admit something many artists never do. She realized she would never be the best. She did not have what it took to become a prima ballerina. Instead of quitting, she adapted. She left the world of classical ballet and entered nightclubs, cabarets, and stage shows. It shocked her family. Dancing in nightclubs was seen as improper, even shameful for a Milanese girl from a good family. But for Igea, it meant freedom. She could earn her own money, control her life, and stay close to the spotlight she loved. By the late 1940s, Igea was known in Italian entertainment circles. She was elegant, intelligent, and confident. Men noticed her, but she was not easily impressed. She valued independence more than romance. At the same time, another life was changing, far away from Milan's polished salons. January 1947, Italy. Charles "Lucky" Luciano arrived as a man in exile. Once the most powerful crime boss in America, he had rebuilt the Mafia into a modern organization. He controlled gambling, prostitution, drugs, and protection rackets. But in 1936, the U.S. government finally brought him down. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison. World War II changed everything. In 1946, after helping U.S. naval intelligence during the war, Luciano was released early on one condition: he would be deported and never return to America. At 49 years old, he landed in Italy with money, fame, and power, but without a country. Luciano tried to reinvent himself. He dressed well, lived quietly, and mixed with wealthy Italians. He wanted respect, or at least the appearance of it. Still, his reputation followed him everywhere. Everyone knew who he was. Early 1948, Milan. At a dinner party filled with business people, artists, and social elites, two worlds collided. Luciano noticed a woman across the room. She was young, elegant, and distant. Her posture was confident, her expression calm. This was Igea Lissoni. She noticed him, too. She recognized his face from newspapers. She knew exactly who he was. And she walked away. Luciano was stunned. He was used to attention. Women usually approached him, not the other way around. But this woman showed no fear, no interest, no curiosity. That bothered him more than insults ever could. He tried again. Through mutual friends, he arranged another meeting, this time at a nightclub in Rome where Igea was performing. After the show, he asked her to dinner. She refused. For the first time in his life, Lucky Luciano had to chase someone. He sent flowers, gifts, messages. Friends tried to convince her. Still, she hesitated. She knew his past, she knew the danger, and she knew how society would judge her. But something changed. Luciano did not behave like the man she expected. He did not threaten. He did not demand. He waited. Slowly, Igea began to see another side of him. He listened. He spoke softly. He showed vulnerability, something no one associated with Lucky Luciano. They began spending time together. Luciano was 50. Igea was 26. The age gap mattered less than the emotional difference. She was modern, Northern Italian, and educated. He was Sicilian, street-raised, and emotionally guarded. Yet somehow they fit. Luciano later admitted something remarkable. He said he had never loved any woman before. He did not even understand what love was, but with Igea, it was different. He thought about her constantly. She was not a one-night affair. She was not a trophy. She was someone he needed. Soon, they lived together. They exchanged rings, though they never legally married. In everything that mattered, they behaved like husband and wife. Igea became the center of Luciano's life. She changed him. She insisted on manners at home, no violence, no shouting, no criminal talk. She filled their rooms with books, art, and music. She encouraged him to read. Surprisingly, he did. He developed a love for Shakespeare. Luciano, the man who once ruled New York's underworld, now spent evenings quietly reading or walking with Igea. Even their pets told the story. They owned small dogs. Luciano adored them. The image shocked those who knew his past. Eventually, Igea made a bold decision. She introduced Luciano to her family. Her father was furious. To him, Luciano was a criminal, an American gangster. This was not the future he wanted for his daughter. The tension was severe. But time softened resistance. Luciano behaved respectfully. He showed commitment. He did not abandon Igea. Slowly, her parents accepted the relationship. By the early 1950s, they were living mostly in Naples, in a large penthouse overlooking the sea. It was there that Luciano tried hardest to live a normal life. He opened legal businesses. A poultry farm failed. An appliance store did better, but eventually collapsed. Money became tighter. Still, Igea stayed. She wanted children. Luciano refused. He did not want his child to grow up as the gangster's son. It was one of the few selfless choices he made. Despite their deep bond, problems existed. Luciano sometimes returned to old habits, flirting, late nights, other women. Igea tolerated much, but not humiliation. Once, she confronted him publicly and pulled out a small pistol. She warned him calmly. Another time, after he slapped her during an argument, she made something clear. If he ever did it again, she would shoot him. Luciano believed her. Their relationship was not perfect. It was intense, emotional, sometimes dangerous, but it was real. Then came illness. 1957. Naples. Igea began feeling tired, weak, small pains that would not disappear. Doctors found tumors in her breast. At first, they hoped it was harmless. Surgery was delayed. The delay proved fatal. By 1958, the truth was clear. Cancer. Luciano begged doctors to save her. He paced hospital halls, praying, smoking endlessly. Surgery removed one breast. For a moment, hope returned. Then the cancer came back. This time, it spread. Doctors told Luciano the truth. Nothing more could be done. For the first time in his life, lucky Luciano was powerless. He sat by her bed every day. He fed her, held her hand, cried openly. September 27, 1958. Igea Lissoni died at age 37. Luciano arranged her funeral personally. He was allowed to attend despite travel restrictions. He followed her coffin in the rain, broken and silent. She was buried in Milan. On her chest lay a silk ribbon with one word: Charlie. Luciano never recovered. The man who survived gang wars, prisons, and governments was destroyed by loss. Years later, before his own death, he said simply, "She was my whole life." After Igea Lissoni's death in September 1958, Charles Lucky Luciano was no longer the same man. People who had known him for decades said something inside him had broken permanently. The penthouse on Via Tasso in Naples, once full of life, laughter, music, and movement, now felt empty and cold. Every room reminded him of her. Her voice, her footsteps, her habits were gone, but her presence lingered everywhere. Luciano followed Italian tradition and wore black for weeks. He rarely went out. When he did, it was usually only to sit quietly at a cafe or walk slowly along the waterfront. The man who once commanded fear and respect across continents now avoided conversation. Even his old associates noticed the change. Lucky Luciano, the architect of modern organized crime, had become withdrawn, quiet, and fragile. At home, only the dogs moved freely through the apartment. They searched for Igea constantly, running from room to room as if expecting her to return at any moment. Luciano watched them with empty eyes. He could not bring himself to give them away. They were the last living connection to the woman who had changed his life. Igea's personal belongings were carefully packed and sent to her sister Daria in Milan. Luciano kept only photographs, dozens of them. He placed them around the apartment and carried some with him in his jacket. Visitors noticed that he would often stare at her image for long minutes without speaking. For the first time in his life, Luciano was truly alone. Financially, things were also growing worse. The money he once received from America had slowed to a trickle. Many of his former allies were either dead, in prison, or struggling themselves. The fall of Havana's casino empire after Castro's revolution destroyed one of Luciano's last reliable income streams. Cuba had once been a golden hub for the syndicate. Now it was gone. Luciano tried small business ventures again, but none succeeded. Without Igea managing the household and encouraging discipline, his motivation disappeared. He lived mostly on old savings, selling off assets slowly. Italian authorities never stopped watching him. To them, Lucky Luciano was never just an old man in exile. He was a symbol, a legend, a convenient suspect. Police reports repeatedly claimed he was secretly controlling international drug networks, even when no evidence supported the accusation. To law enforcement, the idea that Luciano had retired was impossible to accept. In reality, Luciano's world had shrunk. By early 1959, his health also began to fail. Years of stress, smoking, poor habits, and emotional trauma caught up with him. He suffered chest pains, dizziness, and fatigue. Doctors warned him to slow down. For the first time, he listened. It was during this period that Adriana Rizzo entered his life. Adriana was young, 23 years old, a Neapolitan shop assistant who worked in a medical supply store Luciano occasionally visited. She had known him casually for years. There was nothing dramatic about their first real connection. No romance, no passion, just loneliness. Luciano was honest with her from the beginning. He told her about Igea. He made it clear there would be no marriage, no love story, no illusion of replacement. What he needed was companionship and care. Adriana agreed. She moved into the penthouse to help look after him. She cooked, cleaned, and helped manage his medication. She was practical, calm, and emotionally distant enough not to threaten the memory of Igea. Luciano did not love her, and she understood that. Soon after Adriana moved in, Luciano suffered a heart attack. It was not fatal, but it terrified him. Doctors warned that another could kill him. Adriana took control. She regulated his food, limited his movements, and enforced rest. When he tried to ignore medical advice, she scolded him like a child. Once, when he pushed too far, she even struck him lightly to stop him. Luciano laughed afterward. No one else had dared to control him like that since Igea. Meanwhile, in America, the myth of Lucky Luciano continued to grow. Law enforcement officials, especially within the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, remained obsessed with him. Harry Anslinger, head of the Bureau, insisted Luciano was still the mastermind behind global heroin trafficking. Congressional hearings repeated his name again and again. Undercover agents were sent to Naples. One of them, Sal Vizzini, posing as a U.S. Air Force officer, spent time with Luciano. He drank with him, talked with him, observed him closely. What he found did not match the myth. Luciano was aging, tired, and financially strained. He talked more about the past than the future. At one point, Luciano said something revealing. "All I want," he told Vizzini, "is 6 months back in America. 3 months in New York, 3 months in Miami. Then they can bury me." It was not the request of a criminal mastermind. It was the wish of a man who wanted to go home before dying. The authorities never granted it. As his health weakened, Luciano became increasingly concerned with his legacy. He watched as other gangsters were turned into movie characters and legends. Al Capone, Bugs Moran, others. Luciano believed his story had never been told properly. He wanted control over how history would remember him. In the late 1950s, he began working on a film project about his life. He contacted producers and writers. The idea was simple. He wanted to present himself as a misunderstood man, framed by corrupt prosecutors, forced into exile. The project moved slowly. Then came warnings. Luciano was informed, quietly, that powerful figures in the American underworld did not want the film made. They feared it would attract attention, reopen old wounds, or expose secrets. Some messages were polite, others were threats. Luciano understood the danger. He had survived long enough to know when to back down. He agreed to abandon the project. But fate had already decided the ending. January 26, 1962, Naples. Luciano went to the airport to meet Martin Gosch, one of the producers involved in the film discussions. It was supposed to be a final conversation. He dressed carefully. Gray trousers, navy blazer, open-collar shirt. He looked like an aging gentleman, not a gangster. As he walked across the airport parking area, he suddenly stopped. He grabbed Gosch's arm. Then he collapsed. Doctors rushed to help, but it was too late. His heart failed. Lucky Luciano died on the cold concrete of Naples Airport at age 64. For hours, his body lay under a simple cover. The man who once ruled New York's underworld died quietly, far from home. In death, however, the power of his name returned. Arrangements were made to transport his body to the United States. Despite decades of exile, Luciano was buried in New York, in St. John's Cemetery in Queens, near his parents. His gravestone was simple: Charles Luciano, 1897–1962. No titles, no legends, just a name. What Luciano never saw again was Igea. She remained buried in Milan, across the ocean in the family plot. On her chest at burial had been placed a silk ribbon with his name, Charlie. In life and death, she belonged to him, and he to her. Luciano lived almost 4 years after her death, but those who knew him said he never truly lived again. Adriana Rizzo provided care and comfort, but she never replaced what was lost. In his final years, Luciano often stared at Igea's portrait hanging in his apartment. When asked about women, power, or success, he dismissed them all. "She was my whole life," he said quietly. "No girl ever came close." For a man who controlled empires, ordered murders, and reshaped crime itself, his greatest defeat came not from rivals or governments, but from grief. The gangster who had everything lost the one thing he could never replace. After Lucky Luciano's death in January 1962, the world reacted in a way that perfectly captured the contradiction of his life. Governments spoke of him as a criminal mastermind. Newspapers called him the architect of evil. Old mobsters whispered his name with respect. But the man himself was gone, and what remained was a legend shaped by others. In New York, his funeral was quiet but meaningful. Powerful figures attended without drawing attention. There were no speeches, no public mourning, just silent acknowledgement. The American Mafia, whether it admitted it or not, was burying its founder. Luciano's body rested in St. John's Cemetery, Queens. He was placed near his parents and siblings. The stone carried only his name and dates. No mention of power, no mention of crime, just a man who lived and died. In Naples, Adriana Rizzo watched the news silently. She had cared for Luciano in his final years, but she knew her place in his life. She was not the love of his life. She was not his heart. That place had been buried years earlier in Milan. After Luciano's death, Adriana quietly returned to her family. She never sold stories, never sought attention. For her, Lucky Luciano was not history. He was simply an old, broken man she had helped survive his final days. In Milan, Igea Lissoni's grave remained untouched by headlines. No mobsters came, no journalists gathered, only family members and quiet flowers. And yet, without her, Lucky Luciano's story would never have been complete. Those closest to Luciano later said something striking. They said that Igea was the only person who ever changed him without fear. She never admired his crimes, never flattered his power, never asked for money or protection. She demanded dignity, respect, and honesty, things no rival had ever demanded from him. For the first time in his life, Luciano was not the dominant force in the room, and he loved her for it. Historians often debate Luciano's greatest achievement. Some say it was ending the Mafia wars. Others say it was creating the commission. Some argue it was his wartime cooperation with the U.S. government. All of these are true, but none of them explain the man himself. Because power never truly fulfilled Lucky Luciano. Control never made him peaceful. Violence never made him secure. Even survival was something he mastered out of instinct, not joy. It was only with Igea that he experienced something unfamiliar: belonging. In the underworld, Luciano trusted no one completely. Every alliance was temporary, every friendship conditional. Betrayal was expected. But with Igea, there was no strategy, no manipulation, no fear of weakness. She saw him not as a boss, not as a legend, but as a man who needed her. And he knew it. That is why her death destroyed him more effectively than prison ever did. Luciano survived decades of gang wars. He survived assassination attempts. He survived prosecutors, deportation, exile, and enemies. But he did not survive love. After Igea's death, his life lost structure. His ambitions faded. His legendary patience disappeared. He aged quickly. The man who once predicted every move could no longer plan beyond tomorrow. When people asked him in his later years what he regretted, he did not mention crimes. He did not mention prison. He did not mention exile. He mentioned Igea. He said that if he had known how short her life would be, he would have spent more time at home, less time thinking about enemies who no longer mattered. This admission alone tells us something important. Lucky Luciano, the father of modern organized crime, did not measure his life by money or power at the end. He measured it by love. In the years following his death, books, films, and documentaries continued to portray Luciano as a cold, calculating mastermind, and he was. But those portrayals rarely captured the quiet man who sat alone in a Naples apartment, staring at photographs of a Milanese dancer who had changed his world. History remembers Luciano as a gangster, but Luciano remembered himself as Igea's Charlie. And that may be the most human truth of all.